thing that I have thought about with astrology, coming from a Vedic standpoint, we have these ideas of remedial measures, like wear this gemstone and this helps to improve that planet, or do this mantra, or do this kind of service, or whatever it might be, and that helps to direct the direction of the chart. And I, personally, I think it's best to just be aware of what the chart says and then just try to live with that more consciously as being the best remedial measure. Mm-hmm. But there's a particular text I like to read. It's a yogic text, and it talks about how there are countless universes. And in these different universes, sometimes fire is cold and, ice is hot. Like, so pretty much anything that's possible can occur in any of these multiple universes in the multiverse. And it's always been my thought that when it comes to remedial measures, or when you see a person's chart, that you're getting the snapshot of their karma at the moment of their birth. But from the moment of birth onward, they have an opportunity to apply force in different places, or rethink things, or reframe things. And that's why someone, if you look at their birth chart when they're 1 year old and you get them up to 60 or 70, they've had time to work with that. And that's why when you have people that I found that are more interested in meditation, or they're just trying to live a better life, they're not always defined by the chart as we would expect. And my thought on that has always been, well, what if by intending to see the chart in a different light, or to work with a chart through a remedial measure of any sort, that in a sense is shifting your awareness just a slightly bit to maybe a different aspect of the multiverse. And the more you attend to that, the more you put attention towards being conscious about a particular aspect of your chart, it just shifts maybe a little millimeter at a time, but you keep going until eventually you get to a point where you're existing. Again, I don't know how you explain this physically, but to where you're existing in a sense in a different aspect of the multiverse. Therefore, the chart doesn't have to play out in the fatalistic way that a lot of astrologers, and maybe it's just because I'm a Vedic astrologer that I hear a lot of fatalistic predictions, but that's why it doesn't play out in that fatalistic standpoint. Do you have any thoughts about this, or is this just crazy talk from an astrologer who knows nothing about physics?
It's not a crazy talk, and I have been thinking about that too. How does it work? Because in a certain way, when we talk about free will in a way contradicts astrology. And what I mean by that, if we say, look at the chart, right, and look into the future, and we can predict certain events to occur at certain dates, and we can predict that way into the future, many years into the future. And some astrologers can predict when a person dies too, right? So that makes people think, well, that means everything is predefined, everything is pre-calculated for me. There's a program, and I'm just going through the motions, and that makes people maybe sad that, okay, where is my free will, And we as human beings, egoistic human beings, we want to say, I run my own life.
Right.
I'm my own boss. I do what I need to do to be happy, and it's all because I was so good and I made my life so great, right? And so where is the truth? I mean, New York City Meetup has a group, meetup group that I thought of attending, but they actually argue absence of free will. They talk about absence of free will, and you can come and argue with them as much as you want, but that's what they're absence of free will.
Right.
And essentially, physics in a way, and a lot of sciences in a way support the absence of free will. And I'll explain what I mean by that. Say, for example, thermodynamics. What thermodynamics studies? It studies as a system that ideally they say, let's consider this confined system. Let's see how the particles are going to move within that system based on certain interactions, or we heat it up or whatever. So what they essentially trying to do is they trying to study a certain system, and a system could be a human being. You know, we are a system too. It could be simple system or complex system, and they're trying to study it to the point that they can predict the behavior of the system into the future based on certain rules of interactions of particles or whatever, how the system is going to behave.
Right.
And mathematicians, they also work on predictions. Biologists, they study in order to predict. Every science out there, psychologists, they study human psyche in order to predict how a person is going to behave. Everybody is after predictions. Mm-hmm. And in a lot of sciences, they gotten to the point that they can predict way into the future a behavior of a system, right? So see, astrology does not exist, right? And we're working with other sciences. Essentially, some of the scientists gotten to the point they can predict way into the future without astrology. Mm-hmm. We all after predictions, right? And what does it mean? Once we nail it down to business that we can predict way into 100 years into the future, we can predict everything, that supports the fact that we sort of have a program running, and we're literally going through the motions or watching our own movie of our life. Where is free will? Mm-hmm. And when I think about that, I still feel that there's a place for free will. I used to think that, no, the place for free will is lost. I didn't find it. Mm-hmm. Even wrote articles about, the absence of free will, but it's a scary thought. Right? We still want to think that there's a free will. What I started realizing is that I'm developing my own view of it, which probably coincides with some other people's views, but free will comes from consciousness, right? Yes. Consciousness has a program, no doubt about that. Subconsciousness has a program that we live within that subconscious program, right? We encounter opportunities based on that program, based on our chart. The trine or sextile opens up, certain opportunities for us, and we grab them. A lot of it that based on subconscious level. But then what can we do consciously? Consciously, sometimes we can do things, sometimes we can observe, sometimes we create an attitude towards the same event. Especially free will comes about in terms of attitude. Like, say, for example, you're unlucky enough to get into an accident and end up in a hospital, right? For example, you're in a hospital. Mm-hmm. No matter how consciously you tried, you could not avoid this accident. Now you're in a hospital. Mm-hmm. And you do have a choice. You still have a choice. You can cry a river about it, and say you predefine that you're going to spend a year in a hospital. That's how severe your injuries are. Then, in simple words, you could spend a year crying a river that now you have broken bones and you're not going to be able to walk, right? Or you can kind of like think about your life and get some kind of spiritual revelation and get some sort of enlightened thoughts and look at it from positive angle in terms of, oh, now you can rest up and you don't have any responsibilities for this, for that. Other people took responsibilities, and you can just enjoy, 3 times a day meal and dental care by nurses. And then you might actually use your free time and your mind to write a book about it, and then you become a famous writer. Right. You know what I'm saying? Well, it's a simplified version of how you might use your free will within the same predefined circumstances, but it is kind of sort of my view, unless I rethink it in the future, free will.
Well, if it's predestined, you will, right?
Right. Yes. But in terms of multiverse, yes, as a new scientific discoveries show, nuclear physicists have now pre-calculated that multiverse, and the calculations do show that such thing exists, and governments spend millions upon millions of dollars to create a super collider in Europe, right? Countries chip in specifically to test multiverse. Yeah. So they're conducting an experiment or experiments, plural, to see that a certain particle is going to disappear at some point, which proves that it went into a different dimension. And in terms of what you're saying, that if we maybe consciously steer towards better quality life, then you're suggesting that we might snap into a different universe, a different alternative.
Right. And and the snap part is the tricky part, because when most people, I think of this idea of shifting universes or shifting in the multiverse or whatever, I think they often imagine it to be like, bam, I'm in a totally different experience. Like when you watch, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and they go into, where all the bad guys are good guys and all the good guys are bad guys. And that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is, I know I've got an issue or something I want to do or work on, and I'm currently in this particular state of the multiverse, right? And I'm thinking of it beyond time, like that their time is also it's relevant, but if I want to start thinking that I want to go in a different direction, then I put the thought in there first. And by taking that thought, maybe I move like one little micron a little bit closer to that experience. And then I start acting, and then that moves me another couple microns closer to the experience. And then I start seeing success, and I start paying more attention to it. And so even at the end of the day, even at the end of a lifetime, maybe I only shift, like I said, 3 millimeters within that multiverse. Maybe that 3 millimeters is just enough to not get hit by that bus. Right? Because 3 millimeters can go a long way between getting hit by a bus and not getting hit by a bus. So I see it more as it's hard to explain, but if we are all consciousness, and if we can let go of the idea, the attachment that this body and this timeline and all these sorts of things, that it's fixed, that maybe through the power of our consciousness, by shifting in that way, that is one way that we shift our chart, our experience of our chart. And like we were talking about epigenetics, it's one way that we also shift our genetics so that doesn't have to happen. But like you said, some things just happen. Like you do get hit by the bus.
Right.
So what do you do? Well, that's where, like even in the YouTube channel that I have on Kriya Yoga, there was a particular video I did on using your willpower, but also surrender. That some things happen, and once they happen, they have happened. And the only thing that you can do after that is to choose how to use your will from that point.
Right.
And from an astrological standpoint, you can help me make this make more sense in the physics world. But it's like I see the birth chart is, if you've got a ball and you're throwing that ball, that the wind up is kind of like all the karma from the past. And when you release it, that's like the moment of birth. So that's telling you what direction is that ball going in, what is the wind speed at that moment, what is the gravitational pull we have to deal with, what is the drag, all these sorts of things. But after that ball is released, yes, ideally it should go in that direction. But maybe there are other forces that can come into play. Someone catches the ball, or something shifts in consciousness where another individual impacts that ball, which switches the trajectory. So this is what makes, in my mind, it so complicated, is that we have that moment, that initial moment of launching, which is the birth chart. But after that, there are so many variables that can actually impact where that ball is going to go, right? And this is a very simple physics thing in my mind. Does this make sense the way I'm trying to describe it?
It kind of does, but here's what my vision is.
Yeah.
I'm also very visual. I imagine this, and then I can describe it easier.
Uh-huh.
So from my perspective, we're all trying to live longer, right? Trying consciously, or we striving to live longer, but essentially we all are gonna grow old and die, right?
Yeah.
We can't really switch to a different universe where we do not die at all.
Right.
Even though, yes, we haven't those fantasies. That
Exactly.
how can we make our life, to last forever? So anyway, but if we go back to consciousness, what consciousness is versus subconscious. If we kind of look at it from bigger picture perspective, from bigger picture in terms of how we come into this life and what do we do when we leave the life, right? What I mean is our soul, and what I mean is plural lives, incarnation. If we look at this from that perspective, And if we do some more research in terms of spirituality and how these things work and how the soul path goes and how you develop, we find that there are it's like a cake with a lot of layers, sort of. You make an analogy of a bowl, and I'm saying, we have a very basic layer of the cake, right? Where we have our natal chart, for example, and we are born incarnated into this body, and we have this basic layer of the cake. And then as we grow in, we learning certain things about ourselves, we could actually learn and stay within like first or second layer of the cake, which is more like a running life on subconscious level. And they say that children do not develop consciousness until a certain years in teenage years, and they sort of live in this unconscious program when they're young.
Right.
At some point, the consciousness starts kicking in. So I'm saying that consciousness kicks in on the higher levels of the cake. And so say once the consciousness starts kicking in, the consciousness has a free will, not subconsciousness, right? Subconsciousness will stay. The very basic layer of the cake will stay with us. It's a part of us.
Yes.
It's our body. It's our physical body. Our physical body does not have much choice, does not have a free will.
Right.
Only our consciousness, to my understanding, has a free will. And on a conscious level, we can get to the top layer of the cake, which means seeing what we are from the big picture perspective, seeing where we come from, seeing where we're going, and making a choice to be happy about what we're going, the experiences that we're going through, or be unhappy about the experiences. And I'm not saying happy in terms of emotional state,
right?
Because emotions are also at the bottom of the cake. Because emotions are very much dependent on a state of our mind and body in terms of body, physicality.
Right.
We get happy if we eat something sweet, right? Or chocolate. We get unhappy if we get physically hurt. So this is all has to do with the lower layers of the cake.
So when you're speaking of consciousness, though, from your perspective, we're not saying like everything is consciousness. We're talking about the capacity to understand. Right. Okay. All right. That makes sense.
And the top layer of the consciousness is when we consciously understand the life that we live in, the choices that we make, and how we manage our life, and how we look at our relationships from the higher perspective. And that consciousness can go from the understanding standpoint, can go higher and higher and higher, and there's no end to the layers of that cake. And once you get to the very high layer of the cake, and all those layers of the cake, by the way, could be in fact interpreted as multiverse, right? Because with the same horoscope, we live in just a couple of layers,
right?
Very, very basic. Or we can get very, very high, and then we can see all through it. We can watch ourselves craving foods, but we could also consciously understand that, what is it about?
Right.
And my thought is the same exact person going through the same exact motions in life can develop its consciousness to like mid-level and still go through those motions, can develop its consciousness through higher level, and can actually develop this to the super high level. That's my view, again, as of right now.
Yeah.
I don't know what I'm going to say at the conference. That might be slightly altered.
Yeah, there's time for that. But, one thing that you're mentioning is very good, and that's one thing that they speak of in a lot of, at least the Eastern texts I'm familiar with, is that, the body is what is subject to karma. The body is, and that's from our perspective, that's what the astrology is. The body is subject to karma. But what happens is the person learns to realize that they're not just their body. They're not just their emotions. They're not just this life, right? Because that's the other thing. People get caught up in the idea of past lives, and they think of it like it's linear. Like, here's one life, here's the next life, here's the next life, here's the next life. And my thought is that it's not that way. That when we say, I remember a past lifetime, here's what I think that's going on there. That it's not that I actually was like, I have moved from here to there, and I just happen to remember this in the past. My thought is, and this is just for the sake of description, there's just a big ball of consciousness. And right here, here's one lifetime. And over here, here's another lifetime. And here's Nadia, and here's Ryan, and here's Abraham Lincoln, and so on. And they're all points within that ball of experience. And so when person A says, I remember being Abraham Lincoln, all that they're doing is they're just aware of that other part of the consciousness. So it's not that they're actually went from point A of Abraham Lincoln to point B of person B or so on. It's that the more a person becomes aware of this, the more they're able to just appreciate all the lifetimes that consciousness is the one whole thing has experienced.
That's a brilliant point you just brought up. And that speaks about we're all one.
Right.
From physics standpoint, we talked about it last time, is quantum entanglement.
Oh, right. Yes, that's right.
We are so entangled with each other. We're so interconnected that essentially we are one in terms of consciousness of all human beings, all species.
Right.
And it's just like one big tree, and we think we're individual, but we're all just leaves of that tree.
Exactly. And your point that you brought up when you were discussing the idea that we're all one, this whole quantum entanglement, this kind of ties in with yoga in a way too. And being a Kriya Yoga teacher, there's the story and autobiography of a yogi where there's the immortal yogi, the one that lives forever. And sometimes I get these emails from people that say, if I do my meditation techniques right, will I live forever, right? And I think when we think about that it's not about living forever, because as you mentioned, the body grows old and it dies, right? Yeah. And if we think about dreams...
Unless you're an ascended master, you can ascend with your body.
Well, yeah, this brings me to my point. So let's think about this. When we say ascending with your body, when you do that, and it's a physical thing, well, once you experience that state of clarity, well, is it really that you have, quote, ascended with your body, or is it simply that now, as that state of consciousness, which is aware of all these parts of you, that you can simply just go and identify with whatever aspect of consciousness you want to, right?
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
Exactly, yes. Then you become not a leaf that thinks, I'm like all by myself here.
Right,
I can just take off and fly, and the leaf forgets that it's a part of the tree.
Right.
Then when you expand your consciousness to the point that you get that you are part of the big tree, and a tree is a part of a forest, and you can lift up above and see that forest, and see that continent that the forest is rest on, and see that earth that the continent is part of, and see that solar system and see that universe that you are part of.
Right.
And this is expansion of consciousness, where you understand that you are a part, essential part, essentially, of this whole big universe. We're all one.
Yes. Well, this took us into a realm that I wasn't quite expecting to get into, but I think it's very helpful for people to think about it in this way. Because it's important. It's important to understand your astrology, just like it's important that once you get a car, it's important to read the owner's manual so you take care of that car well.
Right.
But it's also important to realize that, if your car breaks down and you need another car, you can probably get one, right?
It's funny you say that, because I always use that analogy in terms of car when I explain to people how, about your own life and your own body, and what happens when you get born, or what happens when you die, is essentially your body is like your vehicle.
Right.
It's if you take care of it, it runs you a long time.
Right.
You get a lot of mileage out of it.
Right. Well,
if you screw up, you break it, you're done.
Well, and that's a good point too, because when we think of karmic things, like for example, I've got a Toyota Camry that I have gotten up to 310,000 miles, right? And the whole time my friends are like, when are you going to get a new car? When are you going to get a new car? And it was that I personally wanted to take care of that vehicle so it would keep running, right?
Right.
But then, you know, also it could have been that no matter how good I took care of that car, maybe a truck runs into it.
True. Yes.
So we have to, that's why I think we have to be very realistic about it's good to take care of our life through understanding our birth chart as best we can. But we also need to be able to be adaptable in case something goes wrong that we weren't planning, so that we can continue, you know, forward. Right.
Right. And then in terms of multiverse and free will, one last thought I wanted to mention is, yes, you could look at this like raising in conscious level within the same body, within the same motions you're going through, raising consciously to the next level, and next level. Yes, you could look at it from the standpoint that you are getting with each next level, you get into a different universe in the multiverse, and you notice that your life becomes different, your relationships become different, and you almost feel like you're a different person. But that only comes, and you do live a better quality life.
Right.
It's the same life, the same motions, but it's a better quality because you have a higher perspective on things that happen to you, higher understanding, and you can help other people to get to the higher level too.
Right. Right. Yeah, good. And this is a wonderful place to transition, because it occurred to me that this talk of multiverse actually does lead us into the idea of different zodiacs in astrology. Okay.